I accept that the advent of technology, it is true, by and large changes tactics. But for technology to change the conduct of war, it's got to be something phenomenal.
Sea control, sir, you talked about area denial. So the classical way of attaining sea control is when you have, as defined in the Mahanian concept, is you have this great big battle and you emerge as a victor, and therefore thereafter you have sea control, sir. But I mean, from the Chinese standpoint, sir, if you push out the envelope of area denial further and further out from your shore, don't you automatically start developing sea control close to your shore, sir? So good morning everyone, and welcome to the next episode of Adm Dialogues. Today I'm truly delighted to have as my guest none other than Admiral Raja Menon, sir. Admiral Raja Menon has been a father figure to all of us in more ways than you probably realize, sir. Of course, being a submariner, that is certainly a bond that we share. But I think for all of us who've grown up in the Navy and read about where the Navy needs to be in future years, you have been a person who has been a shining light and pointed a direction for all of us to sort of have a look at, sir. So, sir, let me just start by firstly thanking you for participating on this platform and for asking you, particularly for the benefit of the young officer today, what motivated you to get in the field of looking at things differently, into looking at maritime strategy, into writing about it, and how important do you feel it is today for a young officer to pursue such interests in his careers?
I think this is hugely important because the education that Indian Armed Forces officers get is largely technical oriented, and it is suited to taking you to the command of a ship. But when you come ashore and start planning strategy, you need an exposure to the humanities and your national heritage. And a lot of that is filled in fact, at the National Defence College. But in some way that perhaps comes a little late. And unless an officer is motivated to read, he may not have the necessary intellectual depth to shine as a strategic thinker in the upper echelons of the armed forces. In many ways, my eyes were opened as commanding officer of a fleet ship when I served under Admiral Awati.
Right.
Admiral Awati was a great believer in naval history, and he used to convene a lot of seminars on maritime history,
Right.
which made me read. And when I started reading the extent to which we used to be a maritime power, and yet we were getting only 12% of the defense budget when I was a captain in the Navy, I came to realize what a fall we had had. And that inspired me to investigate further the great maritime historians.
So, sir, I mean, of course, to read and to understand and to imbibe that and to sort of in shaping policy, that is certainly a definitive requirement for any senior officer. You've taken that to another level by writing as well, sir, and writing books which have gained popularity globally, I would say, sir. So how did that transition take place when you got down to writing serious stuff about maritime strategy, continental wars, and The Long View from Delhi, of course, which was another masterpiece in its own way, sir?
Yeah, well, I faced a big intellectual challenge when I was CI Navy in Staff College and was asked to give a lecture to the whole college on maritime strategy. I was determined to make a good job of it. And as a result, I started reading. And the more I read, the more I realized how little I knew. And that lecture on maritime strategy was something that I was determined to carry forward into bigger work. And I think I wrote the first chapter of maritime strategy and continental wars while I was in Wellington.
Right.
But I couldn't continue the work while I was in service. So when I left the service, the first thing I did was get access to what I thought was the best maritime library in the world at that time, which was the Royal Naval Staff College in Greenwich. And I went at my own expense, spent a month traveling from the house of a friend in London to Greenwich, researching every day. And the result, but I found that even Greenwich was inadequate
Right.
as a source of reference. And I had to wait a whole year to go to the United States and get access to the library of the National Defense University,
Got that.
which was an outstanding library. And it had an outstanding librarian,
More importantly, yes.
more important. And it was a lady, and who when she found out that I intended to write a book, she helped me enormously.
Right.
And they were very welcoming. They never asked for anything other than my passport, and gave me an access for a whole month of research in Washington. And that was the basis of my book.
Fascinating stories, sir. So coming on to something more contemporary, I thought, sir, that we can discuss. And we can discuss the fort versus the fleet, sir. I mean, land versus the sea. And this has become, I would say, quite a topical issue today because of a wide variety of new developments which have taken place. So you have this old saying is foolish is the ship that fights the fort. I mean, who said it is not very clear. But that was based at a time when the reach of the fort extended to maybe 3 miles, and that's how the old concept of territorial waters
Right.
started, and then went on to 12 miles. Then came the missile age, where you have missiles going on to, maybe a couple of 100 miles. Today we are in a totally different era, where you're talking about weapons like the anti-ship ballistic missile, which are going out to 6,000 miles.
Yes.
And to add to that, you have complete transparency.
Yes.
So now you've got transparency, you've got networking, and you've got the reach. In that sense, is the land, the tendency of the land to outweigh the fleet, you feel that has increased with time, sir?
That's a very tough question. Very tough question. But I accept that the advent of technology, it is true, by and large changes tactics. But for technology to change the conduct of war, it's got to be something phenomenal. And I think we witnessed a phenomenal change with the advent in the 1990s of the land attack cruise missile. Why do I say that? Because maritime nations are completely sold on never giving up the idea of sea control. And according to Mahan, sea control can only be achieved by a climactic battle, which, having been fought, then ensures sea control. But here was a weapon which, in the possession of navies, made navies think of more than defeating the enemy fleet in battle, because it enabled them to attack the enemy's homeland. And by and large, this development was not written about for almost 15-20 years, during which, from the 1990s to about 2015-2020, the United States Navy fired something like 2,800 tomahawks in anger, in influencing the course of world events, which is another expression for Mahan's title, The Influence of Sea Power. So, the effect of the land attack cruise missile has been something phenomenal. And but at the same time, this has been, as you quite rightly pointed out, a two-faced development. Some countries took advantage of the development of missiles and the decreasing cost of accurate missiles to go in for what is today called area denial, which was a strategy, I concede, but not a maritime strategy. And the first to go down that route was actually China. Faced with the fact that the enormous power of the US Navy was at their front door.
At the doorstep, yes, absolutely.
They had no choice but to go in for a development which even today is not adequately written about, which is the advent of a fourth service, the Strategic Rocket Forces, where they have the Army, Navy, Air Force and the Strategic Rocket Force. So there is this contest between, as Admiral Gorshkov said, between the fleet and the shore, which you quite rightly said. That battle is up to navies to win or lose. And I noticed with great interest that the Indian Navy has now started building an outstanding ship, the Type 18 destroyer,
Yes.
which is going to have something like 144 vertical launch cells.
Yes.
Why I say that is because there is a very seminal interview of the designate of the next US commander of the Indo-Pacific,
Yes.
Davidson, Admiral Davidson, before the Senate hearings. And he was asked specifically, what about this contest between China and the US Navy? And he has given some remarkable answers, which is worth looking at by every naval strategist. And he said, fortunately, we still have, according to him, a 9-to-1 superiority in fleet versus the shore missiles. And he went on to say a few other things, like the fact that the PLA Navy has no combat experience, so on, which I don't want to go into. Uh, these numbers don't quite tally with my own research. My own research indicates that two things. One, there is a growing tendency to evaluate the strength of a navy by articulating the number of vertical launch cells that the navy can field, and that number for the US Navy is something like 8,600, and the matching figure for the Chinese Navy is about 4,000 and odd. This is a new development in the competition between the fleet versus the shore, and this has to be won.
So, sir, I mean, a couple of follow-up questions over there, sir. This number, when you count, is all right, I would say, if the battle is being fought far out at sea, sir,
Yes.
fleet versus fleet.
Yes.
But if it's being fought closer inshore, then it's a fleet versus a combination of land and fleet from the opposition,
Yes.
sir. So the VLMs now you have to count
Yes.
are not only the ones on the fleet,
Yes.
but also the ones ashore.
Absolutely.
Because you are within their reach. sir.
Absolutely.
So the second issue I wanted to just discuss with you, sir, is that when it comes to sea control, sir, you talked about area denial. So the classical way of attaining sea control is when you have, as defined in the Mahanian concept, is you have this great big battle and you emerge as a victor, and therefore thereafter you have sea control, sir. But I mean, from the Chinese standpoint, sir, if you push out the envelope of area denial further and further out from your shore, don't you automatically start developing sea control close to your shore, sir?
Not quite. I'll explain that. If you take land strategy,
Yes, sir.
What used to be the deciding factor in winning the land war was the maneuver of armored columns. But eventually, the war was won when you occupied territory with the infantry. And that enabled you to say, like for instance, our most decisive victory in war is the liberation of Bangladesh. That occurred when the Indian Army physically occupied with boots on the ground Dhaka.
Yes.
That is the role of the Navy. If you want to use the sea,
You have to be there.
you have to do that at sea. So, in many ways, sea power is like the infantry of the ocean. You may have a tactical victory achieved by other means, but sea use will come to you only when you occupy that spectrum of the sea from the surface of the ocean to 100,000 feet. That spectrum has got to be dominated, and only the naval power can do that.
So, sir, I had another follow-up question from what we last discussed. You talked about the next generation naval destroyers, which are going to have a large number of VLMs. There's one school of thought which says that instead of having a large platform where you concentrate all these, for example, I mean, you've got the Alebergs, I think, which have got 96 VLMs. The Chinese have come out with a Type 55, which has got 112 VLMs. Or is the other option is that you have a larger number of smaller platforms, and you adopt a more distributed architecture, which you can spread out, and you can concentrate the effects if required, sir. So,
Yeah, I agree with that. You need both. You certainly need both. I mean, the way war is going, this idea of distributing firepower is certainly a valid concept. So, you will have not firepower concentrated solely in the big battleships like of yore, but certainly that firepower will be distributed throughout the fleet.
Right, sir. Another thing, sir, we can sort of even talk about in this discussion is regarding on the US today, sir, is being regarded more because of their erosion of their shipbuilding industry, etc. I mean, in the Mahanian concept, if you see, maritime power has got several components.
Yes.
And most of those components, you could say, in the US have sort of eroded over time. Particularly, I would say in shipbuilding, in your maritime, of course, they have a maritime character. And there's one school of thought which says that now they are a naval power, but not truly a maritime power. So, I mean, if you see China on the other way, has risen to be first a maritime power and now is becoming a naval power in that respect, sir. So you're standing on a pyramid that way, sir. So what would be your the danger in adopting what the US has done right now is that your scalability goes down. In times of conflict, you don't have the ability to generate forces rapidly because there's no base. I mean, your shipbuilding base is narrow as compared to a wide spread out base that China has, where they can start civil shipyards building. So you think, I mean, isn't it important for us to really be a truly maritime power in all its dimensions in terms of shipbuilding, in terms of seafaring, in terms of maritime nature? Isn't that a critical requirement?
This is an interesting question. But Monty, the constituents of comprehensive national power seem to be undergoing a shift. And I remember in the early 2000s, I headed a study on comprehensive national power, which is basically a Chinese concept. The first study on comprehensive national power was conducted by the Academy of Military Sciences in Beijing.
Yes.
And somehow that idea never caught on in the United States. I never figured that out.
Right.
But today, the United States is able to project power worldwide despite two glaring weaknesses. One is that it's not a manufacturing country, whereas China is a manufacturer to the world.
Yes.
The other is that less than 1% of the foreign trade of the United States is carried in
American
United
borders.
States shipping, whereas China has the largest merchant marine in the world. But yet, this is something we were talking about. The 6 biggest entities in the world are all United States companies, technology companies. So, the constituent parts of comprehensive national power seem to be undergoing a shift when, so long as you dominate the technological high ground, you can abdicate the foothills to other countries. That seems to be what the rise of Amazon, Alphabet, Google, Meta, Microsoft and all that seem to prove, which in my opinion Trump seems to have completely missed. As far as we are concerned, which route we should follow to comprehensive national power is open. I have no firm views on this. We seem to have opted for the technological route, in the sense that the greatest manufacturing base in the country today is still automobiles. We are not still the manufacturer to the world. But which way that will evolve, I'm not certain.
But the only thing I think is that you expose yourself to a certain amount of risks.
Yes.
Because finally, come combat,
Yes.
you need those Indian flagged vessels if you come to an environment where contested environment
Yes.
close to you.
Yes.
You need to be able to regenerate ordnance that you're expending, and if it's not available to you from outside sources. So there is, if you don't have those homegrown, then I think your risk factor does go up to some extent, because you're depending on external factors which may not be under your control at that particular time.
I'm not sure about that. I'll tell you why. To go back to Mahan again.
Yes.
Mahan died in 1914.
Yes.
But Mahan's theory about the economic strangulation of the enemy was outstandingly proved in World War I, which occurred just after Mahan died.
Yes.
If you remember, I mean, if the viewers might remember, that World War I saw the most appalling massacre in the trenches in France, when Great Britain lost and France together lost almost 7.7 million men in the trenches, and Germany lost 9 million. And there was public uproar in Britain and France asking, don't the generals know how to fight a war better than this? And the general said, but we don't know any other way. This is the center of gravity of the war, and we have to win this war however bloody it may be. And yet, how did the war end? The British imposed a blockade on Germany, and by 1917, the third year of the war, the German housewife was in a desperate condition.
I think she had to carry a sack full of money just to buy a loaf of bread and things like that.
That's right. And Germany was totally dependent on food and coal, on outside supplies, which the British blockade had stopped. So in 1918, when General Ludendorff told the German army commanders, just one more push, the generals declined. Because, as you well know, when soldiers at the front receive mail from home, that's a day when their morale goes up. But when the German soldiers receive mail from home, their morale just collapsed. Because the home front had collapsed. There was no coal to heat the homes, and something like 20,000 German women had miscarriages from malnutrition. So the German chancellor was changed, the Kaiser abdicated, and Germany sued for peace while their army was completely intact on the Western Front. So Mahan has proved absolutely right as far as that's concerned. But after the Second World War, there's been a tremendous shift of maritime nations to flagging their merchant ships with flags of convenience. This started as an economic measure because the shipping companies could make much greater profit if they registered their ships with Panama, Liberia,
Malta,
Hong Kong, and so on. But today, that's become largely a strategic move, in the sense that out of the 8,500 Chinese merchant ships, 46 or 47% are flagged in Panama and Liberia. So, the days when you could economically strangle a country by attacking its shipping may not be possible, because we both been submarine captains. I mean, if you were stationed on patrol in the shipping lane near the Malacca Strait, you will see a merchant ship passing every 15 minutes. and there's no way of identifying who the ship belongs to, where the cargo comes from, who the insurer is, what the destination is. So this is a major problem. What the answer to this is, I don't know. But maybe, but on the other hand, as you quite rightly say, if a country has 30 or 40% of its GDP afloat, that's a juicy target. You can't ignore it.
Yes.
As a maritime strategist, you can't ignore it. So, how will this conundrum turn out? There is a conundrum. I see that, but I don't have the answer.
I think, sir, what these days, to make the connection, even if you're a flag of convenience, there are ways and means and databases that are gradually getting built up where you can trace the ownership, sir. And identification of merchant ships also with automated systems. Of course, AIS may be switched off during combat, etc. You might go dark. But I think these days there are all sorts of communications that take place. I mean, you have, even to the extent of they're saying on containers you have RFID tags.
That's right.
And even the transmissions of 1 or 2 watts, which is made by an RFID,
That's right.
can be picked up by space.
That's right.
So, I think the transparency in this respect, that even if you adopt, registering a large bulk of your shipping with a flag of convenience, that connection, maybe you can get around this issue to find out the ultimate ownership of the vessel.
Maybe.
Yes,
I agree with you. Maybe.
Yeah.
But I'd like to see this happen.
Right. So,
In the sense, can you, within the decision making time, transmit to the ship at sea or to the submarine captain the targeting coordinates
yes.
in time for him to take action? I'd like to see this.
Yes.
If that obstacle can be breached, then the answer
Yes.
is clear.
And also, I think this dilemma comes up more in the case of a submarine, when you're using the submarine as a tool of trade interdiction, sir. But if you're using a ship, and if the merchant fleet is unescorted, then even a ship is adequate, sir, because they're unarmed essentially. Then you have a more powerful tool, because you can board, you can examine, you can send a copy, you can have a look at the papers and then decide whether that vessel proceeds, or it gets commandeered, or it gets disabled. So you have a little more sort of a submarine is maybe in this sort of a case, in a contested environment, of course, it's a very important tool. But if the environment is not that contested, when you're tackling trade, then maybe your other tools might be better to do this job, sir.
I agree with you. I agree with that completely. In fact, I had ventured to write a paper suggesting that in future wars, what navies might have to look at is something like a massive visit, board and search program, especially if you have the geographical advantage of having choke points. But the idea was, I think, ahead of its time, and you require a massive amount of effort.
Absolutely, sir, because in this case, as you mentioned, sir, what truly matters is scale.
Scale.
You have to scale it up, sir, because if you're going to take 4 or 5 vessels, it's insignificant, sir. But if you scale it up to a sizable amount of quantity,
Yes.
then once you start doing the math and it runs into the billions of dollars, then a person starts getting a little concerned.
Yeah.
Yes, at that stage. So,
Yeah.
so scale is a very important aspect in
I
trade
agree,
warfare.
but I think both of us are at the frontier of ideas.
Right, sir.
I mean, if this idea can actually be executed
Yes, sir.
on the ground,
Yes, sir.
then yes,
Yes.
yes.
So I think, sir, we are running out of time right now. It's been an amazing discussion that we've had with you, sir. And I just wanted to thank you, sir. Very important points you raised, but one takeaway, of course, is the matter of presence. So while in an area denial strategy, you might sort of push out the enemy a long way out, but you also have to establish presence, and for that, the maritime tool is a powerful tool to, at sea, of course,
Yeah.
to exercise that presence, so that exercise a sense of ownership
Yeah.
of those waters
Yeah.
in that sense. And of course the importance of the flexibility that sea-based land attack missiles give you. I mean, you can contest that to some extent, but you can contest it more, I would say, of land-based when you have contiguous enemies.
Yes.
Because then, of course, the range.
Then it's different.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I agree.
But
I
if it's non-contiguous, then you have.
Indo-Pakistan case.
Yes, sir.
We are falling more into the analogy of Russia-Ukraine.
Yes, sir.
Lessons.
Yes.
Yeah. When you have contiguous countries,
Yes.
neighbors,
Yes, sir.
in conflict.
But if you have non-contiguous, then the flexibility and the reach that a maritime platform can offer you, and even aviation for that extent, is a powerful tool to have, sir.
Monty, I think we've raised some issues for future generations to solve.
Right, sir.
Because some of these questions are unanswered.
Right.
And I think the bright Commodores and 2-stars of today need to find answers to this.
And I hope some of them, sir, get inspired and take up to writing, and writing not only articles and pieces but even books, because I think we need a lot more people from the service to do that.
Yes.
And we have to become, I mean, really a major source of intellectual material,
Yes.
not only for ourselves but even to shape the environment around us.
Yes.
I think it's a powerful tool, sir.
Absolutely. Because there is no question that India is probably the most maritime oriented maritime power, with 2 seas and an ocean.
Yes.
We have a long way to go.
So thank you once again, sir. Delighted to be here and look forward to having you on the platform again at a later date, sir.